Am I more concerned with seeking answers to my questions, humbly asking others, or making people think that I have all the answers? So whether you've been a Christian for decades or whether you're not even convinced of this Jesus stuff, there's no shame in getting some help. If we want to grow, humbly asking questions, seeking out wisdom from the Bible and from others is a key way to do it. We're going to look at what we can learn from the actions and the responses of Philip and the Ethiopian, and also what we can learn about the character of God from this story. So let's look at Philip first. And what's striking to me is how quickly he responds and how assuredly he acts in response to God's calling. The angel said, "Get up and go." So he got up and went. And then later it says the Spirit said, "Go and join that chariot." And Philip, he ran and he caught up. And remember, his ministry in Samaria at this point was thriving. He was a big deal. So just walking away from that, it wasn't necessarily sensible or logical. And I don't know about you, but I like to have a plan. I like to have my ducks in a row. So if I was Philip, I might have been like, "Okay, God, go to the desert. Got it. I'm just going to start working on my 6-month plan here. I don't want any ministry interruptions, right? And while I'm at it, maybe you could clue me in on why the heck I'm going to the desert." But there's no indication that Philip questions God at all here. No indication that he even stopped at Starbucks and grabbed a latte for the road. He just went. And what this shows me is that he was ready to hear from God. He was ready to hear and to go. He was waiting by the phone. The firefighter, how they get they got the boots inside the pants already. That's the image I get of Philip. He was waiting for God. He's just like, droop, droop. All right, here we go to the desert. But he was ready. He was listening for God's calling. He trusted that God had a plan. So he just took one step of obedience without knowing the whole picture. You might be thinking, hey, this was easy for Philip. He heard from an angel and the Spirit of God told him exactly what to do, but it's not that easy for me. I haven't heard any angels telling me where I need to travel or work or live or where I need to plug in and serve or who I need to share the gospel with. I'm still waiting on that audible voice of God. But let me offer you this. I think that knowing the will of God is something that is accessible to all of us. And here's how we can do it. If you want to know the will of God, start by getting to know the character of God. If you want to know the will of God, start by getting to know the character of God. Let me give you an illustration. So those of you who know my wife, Diana, know that she is a selective eater, okay? She knows what she wants, doesn't stray too far from it. So imagine I'm out running some errands. The plan is for me to pick up dinner on the way home. I get done shopping, give Diana a call, and she's not answering. So I have one of two options at that point. I can either keep calling. If she doesn't answer, just come home empty-handed and say, "Sorry, you're on your own. Didn't know what you wanted." Or I could simply hop in the Culver's drive-thru, order a plain cheeseburger with extra plain on it, and I could bring that home. Because we've been married for 15 years, I can be approximately 100% certain that Diana would be happy with that decision. The third option is getting some tasty tacos, hoping she finally sees the light. And embraces that culinary perfection, man. Original flour taco. But we're still praying about that, all right? The point is, I know Diana's will for dinner because I know Diana. And we can know the will of God by knowing the character of God. I've never heard the audible voice of God, but I want to share with you the closest example I have, the most clarity I've ever received. My family is part of an organization called Safe Families for Children. And the mission is to provide short-term care for kids while their moms get back on their feet to avoid having to put their kids in the foster care system. Average hosting is about 6 weeks or so. And so this was late 2023, and we were made aware of a need. So there was a mom who was incarcerated and due to have a baby in January, and she needed somebody to watch the baby until she was released and could take care of him. But we have 3 kids of our own, and those of you with 3 kids know that a lot of days 3 kids feels like 11 kids. Like it's so hard. And I was planning to take a couple MBA classes in the spring. Work was pretty busy. To be completely honest, taking care of an infant felt like it was going to be too much to handle. But I decided, I'll pray about it. So I remember going on a walk and praying through it. It was cold outside. It wasn't that long of a walk, but I instantly heard God's response. I prayed, God, is this something you want me to do? And I just heard him say back like, James, you know me. You know what I've said about caring for orphans and children and prisoners. Like, you know me. I'm not going to say no. And that's not all he said to me in that moment. He said, James, what else do you know about me? You know that if you do say no to this, I'm not going to love you any less. If you are too scared to say yes, I'm not going to love you any less. And that's still not all I heard in that moment. He said, James, if you say yes, then I am there with you. I am there and I will provide. And he did. Me and Diana, we decided, let's hurry up and say yes before we accidentally think about this anymore and get even more terrified. And God showed up in extraordinary ways, guys. There were some tough times, but in those moments when we were exhausted or discouraged or scared, time and time again, we felt uplifted by the presence of God, by the prayers of the church, and we received exactly what we needed when we needed it. And we're thrilled to say that God continues to show up. And after over a year in our house, that baby is now with his mom. He's thriving. But thinking back on that time, it wasn't a 12-minute prayer walk that revealed God's will for me. That was just the final confirmation. God's will was revealed over time as I came to understand his character through spending time with him, through reading his word, through praying and asking for his wisdom. And that's not to say that God doesn't call people into very specific things at specific times. It's not to say that you'll always know what his full will is for your life. But when you spend time with him, when you get to know him, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what the picture is of what he's calling you into. There's another thing I want to point out about Philip's example here. And remember, he earned the nickname Philip the Evangelist. So this dude knows a thing or two about sharing the gospel. But look at how he approached it here. When he shared the gospel, where did he begin? Verse 35 says, Philip proceeded to tell him the good news about Jesus, beginning with that scripture. He began exactly where the eunuch was reading. He met the eunuch where he was at. He started with his questions. Now, if you've been raised in the church, you may have been given some step-by-step instructions for sharing the gospel. And even as I say that, like you're picturing two cliffs with a canyon and a cross in between, or you may have even been given tracts to pass out. And I'm not saying there's not a time and a place for that. It can be helpful to have some structure and some resources, but often the most effective way to share the gospel is meeting people exactly where they are, listening to them, hearing their questions, and ultimately pointing them to the Word of God for answers. And again, you may see this and be like, Philip was tossed another softball here. Like, that's a pretty good passage to start with if you're going to share the gospel, right? And that's true. That's fair. But the reality is, the entire Bible points to Jesus. From beginning to end. Like where it's obvious and where it's less obvious, it all points back to Jesus. I'll be honest, one of the most enlightening spiritual books that I've ever read is that children's storybook Bible that we have in the back. And reading that to my kids has been awesome. I'm a sucker for like the pretty pictures and the illustrations, admittedly, but that book does a great job of tying everything into the big picture. Like, it's helped me see Jesus in stories where I never saw him before, because everything points back to the big picture. So pick one of those up. Like, I don't care if you're 5 years old or 85. Those little storybook Bibles are good. And it may help you see Jesus where you haven't seen him before. It may help you speak Jesus to others wherever they're at. So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about this Ethiopian traveler and his response. And we know that he's an important official. He's on his way back from a long journey to Jerusalem. We're talking something like 1,500 miles. So he's probably been on the road for months and months at this point. And when he enters the story, he's reading the prophet Isaiah out loud. And at that point in time, most reading was done out loud, so that would have been common. But we also hear he didn't quite understand everything he was reading. I have to imagine at that point, it was a little disheartening for him to have gone on this long journey to worship, but to still not feel like he was quite comprehending this prophecy. But when Philip asked if he understood what he was reading, I love the way he responded. He was just totally honest and humble. He just said, how can I understand unless somebody explains it to me? He wasn't afraid of what people would think. He wasn't afraid of all the people judging him and his traveling party. And I imagine they may have been questioning him at that point. Like, what do you mean you don't know what you're reading, bro? You just dragged us on this 1,500-mile journey. And you're a man of importance. You're just going to invite this random chariot chaser up here to explain things to you? But this was an incredible display of humility. And I have to ask myself, am I that humble? Am I more concerned with seeking answers to my questions, humbly asking others, or making people think that I have all the answers? So whether you've been a Christian for decades or whether you're not even convinced of this Jesus stuff, there's no shame in getting some help. If we want to grow, humbly asking questions, seeking out wisdom from the Bible and from others is a key way to do it. Humility opens the door to understanding.